Played the Monster Man. It was a graveyard smash.
Very cool.
Halloween today is more popular than it's ever been.
They played the Monster Man.
Kids and adults alike try on new faces and do things they wouldn't dream of doing any other night.
Opened the lid and shook his fist.
Reveling in an ancient holiday of fear and fun that goes back 3,000 years, all the way to Ireland and its Celtic tribes, who peered into the world of dark spirits on this magical night. This holiday of tricks and treats is as seductive as it is scary, sparking passion and controversy everywhere it is celebrated.
Then you can Monster Man and do my graveyard smash.
Just like the mask children wear every October 31st, Halloween itself has worn many different faces in its enchanting 3,000-year history.
Thank you.
The Halloween we know today all started here, amid the rocky green hills and magical landscapes of Ireland. Centuries before Christ, a tribe of warriors called the Celts lived throughout the British Isles and northern France. On the rugged shores of the Irish Sea, the Celts formed an agricultural community. And like any people who lived off the earth, nature could be friend or foe. They were at the mercy of the elements, and winter was the scariest time of all.
For the early Celts, once your harvest was in, that was all you'd got. There was no way of getting more. And as the dark days came in, you would look to the winter with a certain amount of trepidation. And it became a time when perhaps your own mortality and the mortality of your community became relevant.
As winter approached, the Celts asked their priest, known as Druids, to pray for them. And the most important night of prayers occurred late in their fall, the last day of the harvest and the first day of the dark of winter. On that night, the Celts believed that the boundary between the world of the living and the spirit world was unusually thin, so thin that the souls of the dead could roam freely back and forth. That night was enormously important to the Celts. They called it Samhain, Gaelic for November.
Samhain represented the transition from the summer to the winter. And these transitional times, the times between the light and the dark, dusk and dawn, were very magical times to the Celts. Weird things could happen at these times that don't happen at other times.
On Samhain night only, the Celts believed those who had died in the past year walked the earth once more. But not every visiting ghost was friendly, so the Celts devised ways to appease these spirits.
It comes from this very archaic sense that the dead return. You have to placate them, you have to do something with them, or they might return and stay, they might trouble you and, haunt you in various ways.
To appease these spirits, the Celts would parade out to the edge of their villages with offerings, trying to coax the evil forces away from their homes. They would leave food and sweets outside as gifts for the dead, a tradition that would eventually become trick-or-treating.
The dead come back to life at Halloween, and that's why there's a great fear of the dead around Halloween. And many of the devices and practices and customs of Halloween in Europe were attempts to keep the dead in their graves.
The Celts believed that the gods controlled the sun, and the shortening days were a sign of their awesome power, so they built bonfires to honor those gods and to pray for the return of the sun. To thank the earth for giving up her bounty at harvest time, the Celts offered the gods blood sacrifices. Cows, horses, and other animals were thrown onto huge bonfires.
The purpose of sacrifice is that something has to be offered back. If the earth had given up her riches in every way, then the early Celts would have considered it only polite to offer back some of their own life essence to the earth.
This life essence offered clues to the future. Druids would read the burnt entrails of the animals like tea leaves, divining who would die and who would prosper in the coming year. Samhain night, when the curtain into the netherworld was parted, was considered the best night of all for predicting the future.
They had to know, was it a good time to move? Who was going to be alive? Who was going to die? Were the leaders going to be healthy for another year? So they looked into the future on that night because that was the night with the changing seasons that the spirits came alive and might have answers.
The prophecies that the Druids read would spread through villages, becoming stories told long into the night. This is thought to be one of the origins of telling ghost stories on Halloween. These ancient Celtic traditions live on among the new pagans of Ireland.
As without the sun, the earth is barren. As without the earth, the sun has no purpose.
These pagans worship nature, using age-old rituals to keep the Celtic Samhain ways alive.
At this Samhain time we stand in the gateway to the other world. We're not so different from the Celtic peoples 2,000 years ago. We still look over our shoulder before we walk into a dark room. We still look over our shoulder if we hear footsteps behind us. We still fear the unknown.
And to her we shall return like a drop of rain flowing.
On Halloween, Chris Thompson's fellow pagans summon ancient deities to their Samhain celebration, a night for invoking the spirits of the dead and thanking the earth spirits for life.
Our Celtic fire wheel will be lit by a green man figure who represents the green fire in the darkness.
In this time between times, in this place between places, in this world between worlds, let us celebrate the dance of life in the darkness.
What we want to experience is the feeling that we are both in all time and no time, a sense of gateway.
The green flame of light dancing in the darkness.
The Irish call the mysterious stone piles dotting their countryside fairy mounds. Celtic tales tell us that on Samhain night it is the fairies in these mounds who roam the earth, just as trick-or-treaters today roam the streets dressed as fairies and otherworldly spirits.
The belief in death, the belief in the wandering spirits, the idea of dressing up in costumes and being allowed to perform mischief and pranks, much as supernatural creatures would. Much of our contemporary Halloween traditions seem to be reflected in this ancient Celtic holiday called Samhain.
The ancient Celts who walked these hills and their beliefs about spirits of the dead and nature's mystical powers gave us the ingredients of the Halloween we know today. On the other side of Europe, at around the same time, ancient Romans were celebrating a night of mystical revelry that also played a big role in shaping modern Halloween. The night was called Pomona. The Romans worshipped Pomona, the goddess of gardens and fruits, in a festival that took place around November 1st. To thank Pomona for a bountiful harvest, Romans laid out apples and nuts in tribute. Apple bobbing on Halloween today, in fact, comes from this Pomona tradition. In 50 BC, the Romans conquered much of northern Europe, spreading Pomona to the land of Samhain. These two traditions began to merge, the traditions of honoring the dead and the harvest. But just as the trend shaping early Halloween began to form, a new force bitterly opposed to all things pagan was taking root all across Europe: Christianity. Samhain would soon find itself in the center of a raging moral battleground: pagan versus Christian. At the dawn of the first millennium, the world was dominated by people whom we now call pagans, People who, like the Celts, worshipped natural spirits and were not part of any formal religion. But the pagan world would soon collide head-on with a powerful movement on the rise across the world, one that would try to conquer everything non-Christian in its path.
In the first century, there is this Christian conviction that all the spirits that other people worship as the gods of the waterfall and the stars and the air, all the other forces which we would call natural forces, forces of the universe, are actually demonic beings, actually hostile, evil, belonging to the world which is opposed to God.
Early Christians attacked the pagan world all around them.
The missionaries recognized that the Celtic people had true supernatural experience, but they felt that if these people thought there was a pantheon of gods and goddesses, that must be the work of the devil who deceived them.
In the early 4th century, the pagan emperor of Rome, Constantine, had a vision of Christ while he was on a battlefield. He converted to Christianity, paving the way for its rise everywhere. In 325, Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea, which laid out Christian doctrine and inspired missionaries to go out and save thousands of pagan souls across Europe. But missionaries soon found that steering the public away from paganism would not be easy.
These cultural traditions are so deep and the images are so deep that you can't just wipe them out. So what you do is baptize them and try to turn them, sort of give them a Christian twist and interpretation, and sanctify them in some way.
The first concrete plan was laid in around the year 600 by Pope Gregory I. Pope Gregory recognized that Christianity was still a young movement, struggling to gain acceptance, and he knew he'd never persuade the pagans to end their ways and take up Christianity all in one step.
He said, if you should come across a group of people worshiping a tree, he said, rather than cut the tree down and tell them that they were ignorant and in error, said instead consecrate it to Christ and tell them to keep meeting as they were accustomed to meeting at the same spot.
But old ways persisted, and the church's success was mixed.
The regular folk were not really interested in Christianity. The idea that you had to wait until the next life to have a good life was not exactly a popular idea. So the Christians had to make Christianity more attractive to the Celts. And so they basically grafted on the new religion onto the practices of the old religion.
By the 8th century, the church had had enough of trying to accommodate the pagans. Pope Gregory III decided to challenge pagan beliefs head-on by turning their most important holiday, Samhain, into a day of the church. November 1st was claimed as All Saints' Day, a day to honor those Christian saints who did not already have a Saints' Day of their own.
All Saints' Day is also known as All Hallows' Day, the word hallow being equivalent to saint. It was the eve of All Hallows that became known as All Hallows' Evening, and through a corruption of the evening, Hallow Eve, we got the contemporary word Halloween.
The church had taken the first step in absorbing the ancient holiday of Samhain. But there were still many pagans who carried on the old beliefs and practices anyway.
People continued to dress in straw costumes or in animal skins, continued to put out offerings for the souls of the dead who were traveling at that particular time, continued to do much of what they had been accustomed to doing, but now doing it under the name of Halloween rather than under the name of Samhain.
In the 10th century, the church took its campaign one step further. It declared November 2nd to be All Souls' Day, a day to remember everyone, saint or not, who died in the last year. It was a direct appropriation of Samhain. But it would take more than that to loosen the grip of age-old traditions. The practice that concerned them most was witchcraft. Witches were a long-time symbol to the church of the very worst of paganism, especially at Samhain time. The word witch comes from the Old English Wicca, or wise one, usually a woman, and witches were long seen by the church as unruly feminine powers who tapped into the darkest aspects of Halloween. In the 1400s, church zealots hunted them down. Punishments were cruel.
The presence of powerful women or sorcerers, witches, would have been particularly troubling to the Christian community and particularly troubling to the clergy. There's no question they would find that more reprehensible than anything else.
And as the devil's handmaidens, witches were portrayed as gruesome, violent hags bent on evil and destruction. In 1486, Pope Innocent VIII published a book claiming a direct link between witchcraft and the devil. He then outlawed the pagan Celtic religion altogether, in large part because of its links to witches.
They were dangerous. They were upsetting the normal male chauvinist universe that has male gods, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, no woman. So women are not welcome in the hierarchy.
Witches were put on trial all over Europe, and those found guilty were hanged or burned alive. In 1431, the witch hunt sweeping across Europe claimed French heroine Joan of Arc. Even she was found guilty of witchcraft and burned at the stake. The idea of the witch as the embodiment of evil was so powerful that even animals associated with witches took on demonic reputations. The black cats we decorate Halloween with today came from a belief that the cat, nocturnal by nature, was a witch's spirit, but in animal form. And the mysterious bat, a familiar Halloween creature, also has its origins in ancient Samhain ways.
In older times, people had bonfires on Halloween. Mosquitoes attracted to the bonfires, and the bats attracted to the mosquitoes, and probably the owls. So you could see them flying over the Halloween bonfires, and they became associated with the holiday.
Throughout its long history, every culture that celebrates Halloween has stamped it with its own local flavor. This is vividly seen in Mexico's Day of the Dead, an ancient festival on All Souls' Day that combines pagan and Christian elements. The Mexican church does not demonize the dead spirits, but encourages celebrations for them. Families hold picnics and tell stories at the grave sites of loved ones.
You get images there, much like you get in Halloween. Images of skeletons. They're in the form of candy. They're in the form of bread. It is a kind of synthesis of pre-existing Indian traditions with Spanish influence, Spanish Catholic influence.
Mexico's Day of the Dead celebration is a good example of how Halloween has adapted itself over time, changing its shape to fit local beliefs. Day of the Dead has its roots in Halloween practices going all the way back to the Middle Ages, but Halloween would make its biggest adaptation in 1517, just as the church was starting to splinter. For as the holy revolution to conquer paganism was reaching its peak, the church itself would soon be torn forever by a revolution from within. By the early 16th century, the Catholic Church was undergoing enormous changes. On Halloween in 1517, Christian revolutionary Martin Luther posted his famous theses attacking church dogma. By launching the Protestant Reformation, Luther changed the face of Christianity and Halloween forever. He rejected all those symbols that stood between worshipers and God, including popes, priests, and saints. So when saints went out of favor, so too did All Saints' Day and, of course, All Hallows' Eve. But the holiday was too popular to go away completely. In England, the Protestants would use Halloween to exploit their battle with the Catholics. On November 5, 1605, a Catholic militant named Guy Fawkes was arrested for trying to blow up the Protestant-dominated House of Lords. Ever since then, Guy Fawkes Night has been a popular English holiday, celebrated with firecrackers and bonfire parties. Since the date was so close to Halloween and some of the customs were similar, the two would blend over time and are often celebrated together.
The custom that has evolved over the centuries in England is for children to make effigies of Guy Fawkes, and then Guy Fawkes is burnt on a bonfire. They spend several weeks prior to November 5th with their dummies and asking people for a penny for the guy. It's a begging tradition, not unlike trick-or-treating in its own way.
Elsewhere, Catholic-Protestant differences would also determine how people spent Halloween. In England's colony, America, the Puritans who settled in New England were bitterly opposed to Halloween. They considered the holiday too pagan and too Catholic.
The Protestants, being rebels, broke away from the Church of England because they believed it was too Catholic. And they left England for the colonies for this reason. And so they didn't want to carry anything with them that had to do with Catholicism. And Halloween was something that had to do with Catholicism.
In 1692, Puritan obsession with the occult came to a bloody climax in the notorious Salem witch trials. Dozens of people were accused of witchcraft. In the end, 20 people were killed, 19 by hanging, and 1 was crushed to death with rocks. But while Puritans waged a virtual holy war on paganism in their midst, not all the American colonies were so hostile. In Virginia, for example, with a large Catholic and Anglican population, the holiday thrived, and Virginia became the birthplace of American Halloween. Halloween parties featuring ghost stories and bobbing for apples were popular in Virginia and in other southern colonies.
All of the colonies believed in witchcraft and magic and the occult. Magic was part of life. And that's the element you need to make sure that Halloween is going to take root again. It's the belief that there is a spirit world.
Some of the most popular Halloween games involved divination, predicting one's future, especially one's romantic prospects. For example, women would look for their future husband's face to appear in foods cooked in a fire. In another popular divination game, a young girl would leave a wet blouse out to dry overnight. While she slept, the man she would marry would come and turn one of the sleeves, or so the superstition went. Divination games were also favorites at big Halloween events called play parties, which were becoming very popular in the early 1800s.
Play parties had a lot of the same elements that we recognize as Halloween today. There were nuts and apples, carved pumpkins, they were community gatherings, there were ghost stories. All those things you can find in a contemporary Halloween or a Halloween of the 20th century.
Halloween would get its biggest boost when an enormous wave of Irish immigrants began coming to America. As their numbers swelled throughout the century, the Irish breathed new life into practices that had already taken hold here. They would bring their traditional Irish Halloween customs, where neighbors and families would carouse long into the night in their homes, sharing scary stories and playing fortune-telling games. These homespun traditions of rural Ireland became enormously popular in the late 19th century, a time of great change in America. The country was in the throes of the industrial age. Millions were flocking from the countryside into the cities, and the rustic values of the Irish newcomers seemed to hearken back to a simpler, easier time.
They carried with them a nostalgia for the old country that became the hallmark of Irish American life. So Irish traditional life became something that was seen as somehow almost something that came from Eden or a golden age or a paradise.
And when some long-time Irish Halloween customs didn't quite fit, they were adapted. For example, the American pumpkin proved much easier to carve into jack-o'-lanterns than the turnip used in Ireland. Carving a scary face into the harmless pumpkin typifies the way prudish Victorian America tried to tame Halloween, turning its darker sides into light-hearted fun. By the end of the 19th century, evil deeds and witchcraft on the holiday were nearly gone. It was being replaced by a holiday not just for adults, but one the whole family could take part in. By the dawn of the 20th century, children would take over this ancient festival and make it their own. World War I broke out in 1914. Thousands of Americans were lost in battle. And in the process, the country would lose its innocence as well. America was growing up, and the ancient traditions of Halloween had to grow up with it.
People were getting a lot more practical and a lot more educated. And the newspapers stopped being filled with recipes and entertainments and started to be filled with real subjects, substance. And people just kind of came to earth right there, and we couldn't give up Halloween, so we dressed up the kids and sent them to parties.
Stay-at-home Halloween parties for adults were fading away, and events for kids took prominence. Children took Halloween out of the home and into the neighborhood. But with children let loose came a resurgence of the dark side that had long bedeviled the holiday: pranks and vandalism. In the 1930s in Queens, New York, for example, young vandals smashed 1,000 windows on Halloween night. At times, the pranks even turned deadly. Halloween was getting out of control, and communities had to find ways to rein it in. Starting in the 1920s, the little town of Anoka, Minnesota, addressed this problem head-on by throwing the country's first big civic Halloween parade. Storyteller Garrison Keillor remembered what it was like to grow up in the Halloween capital of the world.
There was a big granite chip mosaic on the corner of 2nd Avenue and Main Street that said, Anoka, Minnesota, Halloween capital of the world, and a black witch in the center of it. So there was proof. When you're a little child, you take seriously what grown people tell you, especially if it's pretty extravagant. And so I believed this without any question, that somehow out of the entire world, Anoka, Minnesota, had been chosen to be the capital.
Anoka's Halloween parade was launched with a clear goal in mind: tame the children. Anoka, like so many other towns, was looking for a way to rein in the chaos of Halloween.
The reason for Halloween in Anoka, the big civic part of it, the children in their costumes marching down the street, was to try to blunt or thwart the tradition of vandalism, mischief, which was the other side of Halloween, of course.
But even well-meaning Anoka couldn't squelch Halloween mischief altogether. Pranks like this, building collages of junk on neighbors' rooftops, were among the vandals' favorite tricks.
You could toilet paper somebody's house, and I don't know if you've ever tried to get wet toilet paper out of a very tall maple tree, but after you've done that, you start to believe in capital punishment.
Anoka blazed the trail, and the rest of the country soon followed. Popular culture embraced the Halloween craze, sweeping across America, all the way to Hollywood. But the fun would be short-lived. In the early 1940s, the Second World War broke out. Americans were not in a festive mood. Resources were scarce. Costume parties and giving candy were frowned upon. Kids had more urgent matters on their minds, like collecting scrap metal for the war effort. In many cities, Halloween activities were canceled. But after the war, big Halloween events for kids came roaring back with the same worries in mind. Keep it safe.
There were even radio stations during the 40s and 50s who would give away prizes. You would enter your name at the community party, and then if you were home in 30 minutes, that's when they'd make the calls from the radio station. So you'd only win if you were home 30 minutes after the party was over. So they had all sorts of way of making sure that the kids went right home.
After the war, America was prosperous like never before. The sense of well-being brought on a surge in buying and a baby boom.
Groups of boys and girls march to the town recreation center where the Halloween party is going to be held.
This new generation embraced Halloween. Costume parties and trick-or-treating became favorite Halloween pastimes.
Here we go, right over here.
Even the children of Hollywood's most famous reveled in this important and delightful rite of passage.
Where's your mother, Judy Garland? Is she here?
No.
Where's Judy today?
Mommy's at home.
Here's Candy Bergen. Hello, honey. Turn around here so everybody can see you. Where's
Children
your daddy?
everywhere took part.
He's at home.
Events like organized trick-or-treating and Halloween parties helped subdue Halloween's more mischievous side. But the slumbering ancient ghost of Halloween couldn't stay quiet for long. By the 1970s and 80s in Detroit, roving groups of youths began to set fire to buildings, thousands of them, in a Halloween-inspired orgy of arson called Devil's Night. People in Detroit feared for their lives and homes on Halloween, and the whole country was starting to fear for their kids. In the 1970s, rumors began circulating of children dying from razor blades and poisons in trick-or-treat candy. Parents panicked, and X-raying candy became a common occurrence on Halloween night.
With Halloween just 4 days away, officials are urging extra caution this year in Los Angeles.
As it turned out, there were razor blades found in some apples, but they apparently did not cause any deaths. As for poisoned Halloween candy, some children did die from it, but investigators drew the same shocking conclusion from each case. These children were poisoned not by strangers, but by members of their own families.
Trick-or-treat is about trust. These are complete strangers, opening doors to complete strangers. There's a lot of trust in it in our culture now, and I think that that's something that desperately needs to be preserved, which is why all the Halloween tamperings were such an awful thing, because it undercuts that essential trust, which is crucial to the holiday.
Halloween's a time for excitement and make-believe, all right, but it's also a time when you need to be careful to watch out for danger and help friends do the same.
Safety has become a huge worry on Halloween, especially for parents.
It's important that you and your friends go trick-or-treating only in a familiar neighborhood.
Fear has always guided Halloween night, but what the ancient Celts feared on Halloween were otherworldly spirits. What we're usually afraid of is each other. The terror has only worsened by the way popular culture has dealt with Halloween.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago.
Movies like Halloween have spawned numerous nail-biting knockoffs and helped spread the idea that Halloween is a night of evildoing, a night where death is in the air and fear lurks just around the corner. Hollywood has forever made Halloween movies dripping with ghosts and gore, from the creepy to the comical.
There's a spook in Tin Pan Alley, walking on the piano key. He's a jiving kazoo to make the most of his rhythmic tendency. So better watch out, someone's about haunting the town with new kinds of rhythm.
Halloween is the most horrible and at the same time the most humorous of holidays. It evokes all of the things we're most frightened of, and therefore there's a fearsome quality to it. But it also allows us to mock them or make fun of them, which adds a frivolous dimension.
If you see him once, he'll really hex you. Yes, that man can really vex you with his bass.
By taming Halloween, we've turned much of this ancient Celtic night of fear into fun. But this age-old celebration of earthly chaos can probably never be stopped altogether.
Be sure every night that you lock the door tight, turning on every light, making all the room bright. If you don't do it right, what a terrible fright he will give you when he comes.
3,000 years ago, the ancient Celts introduced us to a night when the dead roamed the earth, the night of Halloween. The world of those Celts lies in ruins today, but the pagan beliefs they helped spread live on.
Seed sower, grain reborn, horned one, come. Seed sower, grain reborn, horned one, come.
Groups of contemporary witches, or covens like this one in Connecticut, embrace pagan views and have spun off the New Age movement to grow rapidly in popularity in the U.S. Halloween is one of their most important nights of the year.
I call upon Lucy. They are here.
I call upon James George.
When we do a Samhain ritual, we invite in our loved ones who have passed on. We never invoke or command them to join us because we feel that they may have better things to do than come join us for an hour. They may have been reborn.
Go in peace. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
For contemporary pagans, Halloween includes many of the elements of the ancient Celtic holiday. Firelight, prayer, and even the sacred symbol of the harvest, the apple.
The apple is said to be a sacred fruit.
The apple has always been closely associated with the goddess. When you cut an apple in half crosswise and you hold it up, you will see the shape of a five-pointed star, which is our sacred symbol.
In their union is the spark of creation and the culmination of every harvest.
The knife represents the male and the chalice represents the female, and we say when joined in union they are one. They are the energy which is present in all life and all life forms.
Weavers, weavers, we are weaving the web of life.
The darkness and the drama, it's all very mystical and fun. I think that's what makes Halloween such an exciting holiday for many of us.
Weavers, weavers,
By embracing the religion of ancient Ireland, contemporary witches reject the conventional religious world. This has put them at the center of the age-old battle between paganism and the church. Some Christian groups are continuing the fight against what they call the Devil's Holiday. One such group created this anti-Halloween film from a series they call Pagan Invasion.
Christians can gather together at Halloween and use the night to educate themselves to the dangers of paganism and to take the opportunity to pray and wage spiritual warfare against the powers of darkness in their community.
Some churches are now trying to use Halloween to spread Christian messages. Fundamentalist groups like this one in Dennis, Massachusetts, are building what they call Halloween hell houses and filling them with very contemporary horrors. Visitors to Hell House are subjected to gruesome images of sinners suffering horrible punishments, including demonic possession, and a woman being sent to hell for having an abortion.
We are saying something through the whole exhibit, and what we're saying is you're responsible for your actions.
When you do this,
just the snake on the arm.
The snake rides up the.
To go with that dark-colored wig.
But to most people, Halloween will never be about religion or witchcraft. On October 31st, most folks are just looking for a good time.
Curly blonde like this one?
Yeah.
Americans spend some $2.5 billion a year on Halloween, making it the second biggest commercial holiday, behind only Christmas. More than half of all American homes will be decorated on Halloween.
Trick-or-treat!
And practically every American child goes trick-or-treating.
The good house is across the street, man. Thank you. I got dots. You got dots? Yeah.
And no Halloween would be complete without a costume parade and a visit to a haunted house.
Plenty of room in hell.
Filled with ghouls and ghosts and plenty of stage blood. This beloved Halloween ritual grew out of folk beliefs about houses that held ghostly spirits. Though the past few decades have turned Halloween into a kids' holiday,
Don't just stand there, move.
It is now soaring in popularity among adults as well.
Halloween's become an adult holiday because why should kids have all the fun?
You can perform. You're on your own stage.
I think it's fun. I think it's playful. I think it's profound. I think it's deep.
I think I might be somebody like a vampire or something like that.
During the 50s and 60s, it was pretty much exclusively a children's celebration. What you've seen in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is more and more adult costuming, adult masquerade parties, jack-o'-lantern carving parties among adults, all this adult activities. I think in part it's because those children of the 50s and 60s grew up with Halloween and liked it.
Those baby boomers and their kids now flock to huge and wildly extravagant Halloween parades for adults, like this one in New York City's Greenwich Village. No tricks are played, and the treats are purely visual, as revelers flaunt their costumes in elaborate displays.
It's saying, look how wild I am. You didn't think I was like this, did you? We do allow this wild side to come out for one night a year, and I think it's a good thing that we do. Clearly, we need it, or millions and millions of people would not do it.
For kids and adults alike, Halloween is above all about fantasy, a night where death comes to life, spirits are in the air, and roles are turned upside down.
It's invigorating, it's sensual, there's a freedom to it that is very, very enjoyable. At the same time, it's ritualized. You can do this at a certain time in a certain place. Some of the images of Halloween, some of the decorations, if people would have put them out at any other time of the year, their neighbors would call the police. But at Halloween, you're allowed to take these very disturbing kinds of ideas and deal with them directly. There's a great liberation, a great sense of freedom to that.
Midnight flame, Mary May was in full swing. They sneaked themselves into a temple trance. When the skeleton in the closet started to dance.
Halloween has been called the devil's holiday by some, a night of childlike joy by others. But it must have struck a chord somewhere deep within us, for it has survived so many attacks and spread across so many lands since it began in ancient Ireland 3,000 years ago. To some people, Halloween will always be a threat, but to the rest, it is a night for fantasy and playing with the things that scare us most. Perhaps we want Halloween to always remain a mystery hidden behind a mask.
In the closet, rattling his